Whenever you are, Vix.
So this allows me to hear.
Yeah. I recommend people get into it. I say this every single episode. I'm like, I recommend the headphones
Oh
because
yeah.
you guys don't have this?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
But when we're in a studio, I wouldn't use it.
Oh, okay.
But this is really clear.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
feels like nice, like disconnected. Um, all right, cool. Well, welcome to the Gyaff, Kiana Wilburg. So nice to have you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
your time. I know you're super busy. You're probably one of the
Yes.
busier people in the country. But how are you doing?
I'm doing okay, and thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I actually have two press conferences to cover today,
Okay.
but I'm really happy to be here and to share my experiences, my perspectives.
No problem. Well, if we're running short on time, you just give me the signal, and
Got you.
we'll wrap it up. So yeah, no, I just wanted to have you come talk about. I read a lot of your work, and I think you do great work covering the
you.
oil and gas, and just your writing in general is so good. And I just this platform that we've created here is to really share with the Guyanese people, especially the younger people, different perspectives. I think there's such a chokehold on free information in this
Yeah.
country from a non political perspective.
Yeah.
So when professionals like yourself come in and give your just like unbiased perspectives, I think it really inspires a lot of people. I think the rhetoric we hear every day has this like way of just keeping you down,
Yeah.
So yeah, but just to start, just on the basics, like how did you end up in journalism, and then more so, how did that lead to oil and gas?
So thank you for that question. I actually ended up in journalism by mistake. My first option was to be a teacher. I wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. He's been an English teacher for decades. And I've always loved his relationship with the language. He's very old school, does not believe in the internet. My father loves textbooks, flipping through the pages. Whatever he wants, he goes to that. And I've always admired that diligence and that care, that genuine love for teaching, and I wanted to emulate that. And so when I was finished with high school, that was the one thing that I wanted to do. And my obsession at the time was not English language, it was agriculture. Agriculture is my first love. I love plants, I love animals.
You have a green thumb? Yeah.
Yeah, so I just loved the idea of being able to carry on my father's legacy. And unfortunately, when I had applied to various schools at the time, they told me that, we think you're a bit young to teach CXC agriculture. Perhaps check us back in 2 or 3 years. So I said to myself, okay, this is a little step back, a setback. I'll do the second best thing that I love, which is to write. And I started going through the newspapers looking for vacancies, and I saw that in the Kaieteur news, there was a vacancy for a reporter, and I had applied. My cousin, Abina Rockcliffe, was working there at the time, and, I asked her to put in a good word for me. She did, and I was able to get one foot in the door, and I said to myself, I believe in hard work. I believe in a good work ethic. I think it takes you places that even an education cannot take you. And I promised myself, and I'm also a big believer in prayers, the power of prayer. And I promised God, just let me get this opportunity, because I always admired Kaieteur News and the style of reporting at the time. It was very flamboyant, very out there. And I said, you know what, maybe this can be something that I can work with. I applied in 2013. And I've been working there ever since. And in the period 2013, my reporting was, I started out in court.
Okay.
And normally, court is where you learn the basics. You understand how to write a story. Sometimes the editors would say, "Okay, how about you compile some of your reportings on the court, the court beat, and you make features out of that." So, for example, you would do a feature on what is the state of play of probation, or what's the state of play for people who have been incarcerated for minor matters. Why do they have to be remanded instead of, having some type of other, like community service or what's not? And it was that sort of branching out that helped me to do feature writing and to step out and to find myself as a journalist. And
You got to dip your toes in different
yes,
yeah
yes,
topics. Yeah.
yeah. And when the country discovered oil in 2015, that was an eye-opening experience for everyone, because it was as though it was an explosion of new ideas and a new platform for everyone to begin at the same learning point. So it wasn't, especially in journalism, I'm referring to, it wasn't as though you had, veterans, you have your veterans in education, you have veterans in different beats. But at this point for oil and gas, it was almost as though everyone was starting at ground zero to learn how to report on this new industry. And that was very exciting for me. So I wanted to take first jump at that. And I did. Kaieteur News allowed me the platform to learn, unlearn, and to speak with different experts on the subject matter. So I've been doing that since 2015.
Nice, fantastic, and what an industry to be in the center of in terms of reporting.
Right.
I kind of want to ask you how difficult was that from inception to just start oil and gas reporting, because when you're dealing with oil and gas, there's so many heavy players. You're dealing with corporations involved who are really stringent with their PR. You're dealing with politicians who, well, first of all, this industry was very new to them and still very much is so. And then there's a lot of, depending on who's in power, there's a lot of, I don't want to say flip-flopping, but people conveniently switch the narrative based on what's going on. So, how do you navigate all that mess to report in a way that's transparent, where, you're giving the audience or your audience, an accurate representation? I know in a way that's subjective based on wherever information you get, but how do you build those? And in addition to that, how do you build the networks with people who can supply reliable, accurate information that we may not otherwise get from the big stakeholders?
So I think that is such an important question, and thank you for that, Alex. Reporting on oil and gas has been a learning experience for myself, and I think it takes, to report on oil and gas, you need to have the ability to accept that you may not understand the subject fully when you are reporting it, because the matter is always changing. When you think you understand a topic today, you may meet 4 or 5 other individuals who may be able to say, well, okay, there's a broader or global context that you can understand this subject matter. It's not just looking at it, it's not just looking at the tree, but it's looking at the forest. And in oil and gas, it's been a lot of that at Kaieteur News. We started out where everyone was, and there were times when I wouldn't say that the reporting, at least from my end, where the reporting was not as transparent as we wanted it to be, but as we learned more and as we engaged more experts in the field, we started to understand, okay, well, there's more nuances that we can share on this topic. And one that easily comes to mind is ring fencing, understanding production sharing agreements, for example. So previously, when we started reporting on the oil and gas industry in Kaieteur News, one would say, okay, well, let's look at the production sharing agreement for Guyana versus Suriname versus Venezuela versus Trinidad and Tobago versus any other country that may have a production sharing agreement. But as you continue the discussion, you begin to understand you cannot lump all of them together because each country has a different starting point. Each country, a country that has been in the industry for 100 years, clearly they would have a different legislative framework. Their production sharing agreements may be well more advanced. You cannot compare that to Guyana that is now starting out.
Not to mention you're comparing it with the current state of events globally.
Right, and all of those dynamics change. What has occurred 100 years ago? You can compare
Exactly,
that
yeah.
to today and what you can ask for. So there's so many different nuances that you have to consider, and it's important to share those things with the public. And for me, it's important as a journalist as well as a citizen. That's what I would want to know, and that is what I feel I have a responsibility to share with citizens, to share with my audience, and to even be that person of integrity to say, well, hey, you know what? I got it wrong, and that's okay. It
Yeah.
it has to be okay to and not just okay, but it has to be part of who you are in this profession to correct your mistakes or to correct your misunderstandings because we don't know it all.
Yeah, definitely. You know, and I'm so glad to hear you say that because, ultimately, I think the whole country is learning as this is going along.
Yeah.
And, even as a reporter, I don't think anyone expects you to, there's so many parts to understand the whole industry. There's so many parts of the industry, the accounting side, the production side, the technical side. And it's like, nobody has a grasp of every single thing. Maybe a select few that don't even come here. But, yeah, like you said, I think the more exposure we get, the more familiar we become. And then we can sort of get more comfortable. When there's a situation, though, that arises where you have to, and like I said, because the information is so guarded for multiple different reasons, as a reporter, how do you sort of press the envelope with, like, when someone isn't giving up the information you need, how do you press that to the point where you're like, look, like, you owe it to the Guyanese people or the Guyanese public to disclose this, you kind of have to stop being so tight with this. I don't really know what
Yeah.
that looks like, but I assume that, like, there's a point where, especially in politics, where I guess there's a lot of stalling and diverting, where it doesn't maybe get to the points or the questions that you need to get answered. How do you sort of press that need for answers?
So before the Stabber Block production sharing agreement was made public, there was this talk or the perception that, the document cannot be released because of confidentiality. So the position Kaieteur News took was there can't be confidentiality when you're dealing with the resources or the patrimony that belongs to the people of the country. But despite putting out that perspective, the politicians at the time insisted, the APNU AFC regime at the time insisted that, what, we can't make this document public. So what did Kaieteur News do? For 1 full year, we banged it on the front page, released the contract, released the contract, released the contract. And we were willing to go for another year until that contract is released. Sometimes it's not always easy getting information that the public deserves to know. But I think persistence is definitely one of the qualities that I've been able to hone or develop over the years. You can't always feel disheartened when one door closes. Sometimes you have to keep hitting on that door 1,000 times to get the facts, to get the truth that the people deserve to know. And that has been one of the strategies that Kaieteur News or myself I've employed there. You keep hitting an issue over and over until you get or the response that you're looking for, until you get the truth, or until you are able to get the attention of the right stakeholders to make this a subject that needs to be debated and that requires some level of accountability. And thus far, it has worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess also you have to sort of toe a line even with that, because you don't want to go, you want it to descend in a cuss out / screaming match.
No, no, no,
You know,
not at all.
not that a media host would ever do that, but I just mean I taking it too far, or because I and again, it just brings me to a question. I had a German journalist on here a few weeks ago, and she asked me, well, what do you think is the state of the freedom of press in Guyana? And I couldn't really I couldn't really answer. I because I just there's a I think like the fact that you and I can sit here and have these discussions without repercussion so far means that like it's in a good state that people can discuss certain things. However, I know a significant amount of people are very uncomfortable with giving public statements, even if like they have nothing to lose,
Right.
because there's this instinctual fear of victimization.
Right.
So, I would sort of ask you, like, what is the state of, freedom of press or freedom of speech, and just sort of pushing for answers or information? Because even though, you mentioned that when you guys are looking for that type of information, like to reveal the details of the contract, of the production sharing agreement, were there any like repercussions of, keeping like putting it on the front page or keep pressing information? I assume that would, regardless of who's in government, would alienate the people in charge.
So, freedom of the press is a really important subject that has come up for debate over the years. There have been instances. I don't think anyone can turn a blind eye to the fact that there have been instances of victimization. And there are instances where you feel as though you are not able to express yourself bluntly because there might be critics either on either side or supporters of either side who might come after you. And that's just a fear that's not shared. It's not as though it's isolated to one period of the media life. It's a fear that has continued, throughout. And I think what's important though is that the media is such a powerful force by itself. And there are instances where you see there's victimization and the media just, they rally around each other. And I think that is important. I know that at least it's Kaieteur News does that. Starbrook News does that. And for me, that is what's important, that when there are instances of victimization, there isn't any attempt to try to prevent persons from reporting that. We have a very active press association that takes those matters very seriously.
Yeah.
And whenever those instances occur, they are reported on, and the government, any government of the time, they're held accountable, they're told about it. Yeah. So I think freedom of the press is safe and except for instances where people feel victimized, or people may feel, they cannot express themselves freely. I think overall freedom of the press has been well preserved.
Yeah. I'm also hopeful that there's more opportunity for programs like this, just the forums, which there are. I'm seeing a lot of people doing it. They're quite heavily critical of government and public sector, which is kind of like a constant talking point that never gets old, right?
Yeah.
But I'm noticing that more people are getting into that space of especially online, of voicing their opinion and having forums, and there are different styles, which is interesting to see, and it kind of shows me that even the state of media is changing, like how people get
Yes.
information.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that? I mean, you work for a newspaper, and to me it's interesting because you hardly see people with as much print anymore. It's always online, or it's on your phone. But I'm assuming the media has to like constantly evolve with the way we get information, the way information is distributed. Based on your time at Kaieteur from 2013 to now, how have you seen that enterprise or that industry evolve, and how has like Kaieteur sort of adapted to that, to where it is now?
So in 2013, there was still a lot of emphasis on print and the traditional forms of media, including, radio, television. But there has been this transition, this trend towards social media platforms such as Facebook, and people sharing, being way more innovative. Now you have the rise of TikTok. People are using those platforms to share information, and I think that it's complementary to the traditional forms. I don't think the traditional forms are going to die off just yet. But Kaieteur News has been able to adapt in the sense of not only ensuring that it has a social media presence through Facebook, as well as its own website, which it has had for decades. But apart from adapting in that way, Kaieteur News has recognized the need to provide content that's not what people are looking for on social media. So you have these sort of like buzz news that people are looking for the first 2, 3 paragraphs. They want to know, what's going on with accidents. They want to know what's going on with infrastructural developments. And all of that you get online. And we've been able to keep up with that. But I think there is still a thirst for investigative reporting that the media landscape has not really transitioned completely to social media where that is concerned. So there is still a space for the traditional media, the Kaieteur News, the Stabrook News, Chronicle, and Guyana Times. There's still a space for that. When it comes to the comprehensive pieces that you would need, those in-depth feature pieces, for example, even in-depth pieces on crime. And I think that is for the bigger appetites.
Yeah.
That type of reporting, that type of medium is for that. But Kaieteur News is adapting to the current wave of technological advancements, the way that is having an impression on how people want to digest the news. And I think it's only to our benefit, and we have to move with that tide.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a couple points on this. It's interesting to see the landscape develop in social media where you get more engagement, obviously, and you can also measure your engagement, so to speak, which could be a good or a bad thing.
Yep.
One is that obviously you can't go in depth with the kind of social media engagement you'd be looking for if you're looking for numbers, because the attention span of people is just not there
Right.
anymore.
Right.
So that's the biggest thing. My only thing with that is that if a media house invests too heavily in that, then there's so much more, and especially if you're going after headlines that are that have so much more depth and nuance to them, then you sort of get an influx of critics that for what, based on just these one or two sentences, they obviously have a disagreement that they will need to voice. I don't know how that affects your operation, if at all. Probably not, because ultimately you're just reporting. But with regards to the long form content, how is that like? How do you keep the? How do you decide what to go after? Because I would imagine in an industry where you're sort of fighting for, human resources, to do that long form investigative content, it takes a lot more time, a lot more effort than just sort of maybe pumping out articles that can sell, I guess.
Right.
So how do you sort of reconcile the two?
So we have been dealing with an issue that many media houses are also affected by, and that's shortage of staff. And so the shortage of staff comes from the fact, or stems from the fact, that you have the oil and gas industry and its domino effect, which is pulling people away from the traditional media reporting industry. And so the few that you have left, it puts a strain on the type of investigative, the quantity of investigative work that you can get done. And so sometimes I have two projects that I'm working on since last year, and I have not been able to complete those as yet because they require me to do in-depth interviews. They require me to be away from the office for a bit of time, and that's not always feasible because you have to chip in and assist with the other assignments, the other tasks that are there. So it's not always easy to churn out the comprehensive pieces as quickly as you would want to. But the system that we have in place is, if, for example, I need a month to work on a specific piece, that time would be granted to me. But then after that, I need to get back into the cycle.
Yeah.
So that's the type of framework that we have. It's really stringent, but what really puts us on the strain is the inability to find staff who can come on board and hit the ground running. It's really difficult at this point in time, and there is so much to report on. Sometimes it's very difficult to keep up with the number of activities that's you have unfolding in the different industries. But one of the things that I admire about Kaieteur News is that we have sort of taken a decision to not let the newspaper go without one oil and gas story. I think oil and gas is the focus for us because it's the biggest lottery the country has ever won. There is no greater time to be 18 and Guyanese in this country. And because we understand the magnitude of that, the entire team understands the magnitude of that, we are constantly trying to find different topics, and sometimes even the tough ones, to get the reporting out on it. Sometimes we find ourselves reporting on an issue for 2-3 years, one topic, 2-3 years, because by year 2, the public is now beginning to say, well, what is this local content thing you're talking about? Never mind, we've been talking about local content since the year before. But we have to constantly keep abreast with the pace at which the country is learning, and to follow that, even if we have to bring back or regurgitate some of the things that we've already covered. That's where the country is. And then you still have to compete with the other interests of the Guyanese, because people want to know about different things that's happening. People want to know about the development in health, education, infrastructure. They want to know what what new tourism packages are available. They want to know what are the plans for Mashramani. You still have to keep up with all these different things that the public wants to know about, but at the same time educate them on one of the most transformational industries of our time.
Yeah. Kaieteur News really takes on the whole oil and gas industry very frontally,
Yeah.
and I think everybody, and especially with how Glenn does it too. By the way, on that, it must be hard working for Kaieteur News, because if the boss is so heavy on having a presence and giving information, everybody on him, has to keep up with that. That's, I find that
Yeah.
as much as you can, I guess, have your criticisms or comments on the way he does it. It is impressive how passionate he is about putting out that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
There's not many people that would have that presence and that drive. But you guys obviously take on the industry very frontally, and and there is a lot of scrutiny on Exxon and their presence in Guyana and stuff
Right.
like that. I'm curious, and just as much as you can say, like, what is the relationship like with Exxon in terms of getting information? How is that strictly, whatever the public gets, you get, or are they quite responsive to investigative questions that you have?
So where Kaieteur News is concerned, I know that I have made requests for interviews with the top brass of Exxon Mobile Guyana Limited, and those requests were not met. But I have seen that the officials have been able to make themselves available for interviews with other media houses or for other, platforms. That is not to say that they are obligated to speak with Kaieteur News. I understand and I know that they're not obligated to, but it just gives an example of the openness where the two are concerned. I don't think that ExxonMobil is necessarily welcoming of the Kaieteur News approach with open arms, and understandably, because we're very critical and we're repetitive with many of the points that the newspaper makes. And to me, that's fine. That doesn't stop Kaieteur News from doing what, it has set on its agenda. But I don't think that despite that, I don't think that the relationship is adversarial at all.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we recognize, and I know for a fact that I do, and the entire team, we recognize that ExxonMobil is a partner that we have to work with, and we have to understand its role in our development. And it's because we understand their role in our development, how the fact that they hold such a huge, they have such a major role to play, I think, is what underscores the sort of passionate approach
Yeah.
that we take towards getting certain pieces of information from them. And while they have not responded to our request for interviews, they have, I have seen a openness to hold press conferences, maybe not as frequently as we may like for the public's own good, or in the interest of the public, but they have been open to holding press conferences that speak to some of their achievements, and we often use that opportunity to field our questions on burning issues, and they've been very and I must say they're always receptive to the questions. There isn't any shutdown of questions from Kaieteur News.
Yeah. Interesting. When I look at the programs on Kaieteur News online, done by Glenn especially, I'm seeing they talk a lot about production sharing agreement and royalties and a good or bad deal, it's just a lot of the talk, and rightfully so. It's important. When you sort of spend so long in the industry, do you, I mean, it sort of made the sound like we're being ripped off by a bad deal. And you can interpret however you want. I'm not saying it's one way or the other. But doing an investigation, what do you think is the responsibility? Like, I mean, to me, it feels like we're in this gray area where one government started as oil and gas, began, another government took over, and we're still dealing with issues. But at the end of the day, Guyana is still the public is kind of screwed, for lack of a better word. And there's a lot of talk about, Exxon taking advantage, or these big companies taking advantage. Who is to blame for Guyana's sort of position in this, or how we would benefit or not? Is it mostly government, or is it corporations? Like, how do you sort of, because if there's so much antagonism towards these groups of people who are making the deal on our behalf, who do we blame, for, and I know it's not a black or white thing where you just point fingers and say, oh, it's this person's fault or that person's fault. But how do you reconcile the two in that regard? Or is it just that you report whatever is available and you let the public decide through just factual reporting?
Wow, that's a multifaceted question. So I'll take the last part first. What Kaieteur News hasn't ever to do where the contract is concerned is to explain what is our take from it. So what does the contract offer? It offers a 2% royalty. Then it offers a 50-50 split of profit oil. And profit oil has to do, or it describes the oil that remains after you've allowed the company to clear off a portion of its expenses for a period of time. So what's left after they've given you their royalty and they've taken out expenses, that's what you split 50-50. So if it's 10 barrels that's left, 5 for you, 5 for me. So in addition to that, we do get some taxes here and there. Now, what we have done is to say is a 2% royalty, a 50-50 split of profit oil, and a few taxes. Is this fair? How do we ascertain if it's fair? We've asked several experts, regionally as well as internationally, and they all agree the contract is low. It's on the low end. It's on the very low end, and I'm being
Sure.
very, very, very kind here. It's on the very low end when it comes to giving a country what it deserves, because at the end of the day, those terms were created during a time when Guyana had already discovered oil, not before. So you knew that you have oil, but yet you had a very meager take that you were generous in giving the benefits, the lion's share of the benefits, to the contractor. So in addition to confirming this with regional and international experts on the subject, we also did our digging, which is why I explained to you we started out in the beginning of comparing it with all the contracts that we could possibly find. And even though one might argue that there were some instances where maybe you can compare the PSA to, let's say, those in the US or, those of Indonesia, which is considered the grandfather of production sharing agreements.
But because you're dealing with a country with no experience,
Yes. There were many instances where we found that even when you do a side-by-side comparison, countries were asking for way more than we were. And they did not even have the resource base that we had at the time. So that confirmed to us, or that allowed us to put a convincing, an irrefutably convincing case before the masses to say, we did not get what we deserve. Now, we did not get what we deserve, and who's to blame for that? Now, you had a very experienced company, one of the largest publicly traded companies in the world, negotiating with a country that has never done this type of negotiation at such scale. One can argue and say, you know what, the government was the government at the time was in over its head. It could have employed more experts. It could have done this. It could have done that. Yes, it's responsible for a lopsided agreement that we have. Is all lost? No. So what can we do now? Which is to claw back value. And there's some people at one side of the country who's saying, claw back value through direct renegotiation. Let's go back to the table. We have enough resources to say, okay, you know what? We deserve to get more than 2%. Then there's another side of the country that's saying, no, we cannot go through with direct renegotiation because we need to respect sanctity of contracts. Guyana cannot be seen as a country that just undoes contracts because
Bad business.
it's not good for business, it's not good for investments, it's not good for the country's reputation. It's not the type of reputation Guyana wants on the international market, especially now that it's part of the global oil players club.
Yeah.
So
It could kind of mess up other industries as well.
yes. So you have, and that side of the room is also saying, look, let's claw back value by doing other indirect things, such as the creation of a gas to energy strategy, such as a local content legislation, such as a petroleum activities law that increases the benefits for Guyana on future contracts, not on the existing, not on doing the ones that already exist. And the argument, the themes between the two that I see is both sides want more benefits for the country, but each is saying, I want this vehicle to do it this way, and another one is saying, no, I want to do it that way. My job as a journalist is to put both sides to the public, to say this is what we can get through direct negotiations. These are the benefits, these are the pros and cons, and this is what the government is saying. And it's up for the public to decide. It's not up to me to be judge, jury, and execution and say, this is the perspective that you must take.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That was,
Sorry if I was
no.
long-winded.
That was fantastic. Obviously, this is exactly what you said is what we read. Obviously, you've just put it over in very, in depth and just for the audience to understand very clear terms. So thank you very much for that. Mm-hmm. It's interesting because you could really see it in any way. And ultimately, I think, a small country like Guyana against big corporations like Exxon dealing in such a high value commodity is like, there's really no, it's hard to see us like really winning in that sort of negotiation, Mm-hmm. There are things we can do obviously to get a better deal. But I do think that regardless, Guyana is going to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And whether we make $10 billion or $100 billion, they're both transformative sums of money. But, it's up to the people in charge to actually use that to make a difference. And I think that maybe that's ultimately what a lot of this comes down to. Mm-hmm. So, there's many ways you can look at it. And I think only time will tell really.
Yes.
Well, we
Yes.
could come back and have this discussion 10 years from now, and hopefully we'll be like, okay, we got a less than stellar deal initially, but maybe we made it work or something. I hope.
Yep.
But yeah, it's all very interesting. I want to ask you, and this is something I have been kind of looking into and not fully grasping totally. There's a key word going around these days, a triggering word, if I may, called ring fencing.
Yeah.
And it's, to my understanding, it's this idea that, it's, in just simple terms, I would call it consolidated accounting. But would you be able, in very simple terms, be able to break that down for me?
Absolutely. So imagine that you have a sweetie shop, a little sweetie stall, and you're selling, your biscuits, you're selling, your toffees and your mints every single day. And you're making a profit from this one sweetie stall. And so your sister comes along and she says, you know what? I want a sweetie stall too. How about you give me your profits from your sweetie stall and I will use it to make my own? That is what happens in the absence of ring fencing. If you have ring fencing, which means that Alex's sweetie stall, the profits from it, that handles the expenses related to that stall. If your sister would like to create her own, she has to make her own investment. Even if Alex would like to create a second stall, you would now take a separate set of revenue. If you would like to take a loan, or if you want to borrow some money from your sister, if you want to borrow some money from your mom, and you would take the money that you borrowed or that you got and make the investment in that second initiative. And then when the profits from that start rolling, you use the profits from that to take care of whatever expenses are related to that project. So, in simple terms, each project must pay for itself.
Yeah.
Now, let's relate that to the Stabroek Block agreement. The Stabroek Block is a massive, it's one of the largest deep water concessions that you have in this decade right now. There aren't many companies that can boast of having a concession that large. It's so large that Exxon can see having 10 FPSOs, and not just 10, at least 10 FPSOs on that single concession, on that single block. It's really, really large. So, what's happening is, in the absence of ring fencing, Guyana currently has 3 projects on stream or operating. You have Liza 1, you have Liza 2, and Prosperity, or what you call Payara, sorry. Prosperity is the name of the vessel that is operating in the Payara project, which is the third. So you have those 3 projects operating. Now, what's happening is Exxon is able to use the profits or the revenues made from those 3 projects to invest in having other projects come on stream at a much faster rate. As opposed to, if they were ring fencing in place, they probably would have had to taken a loan or explore some other type of financing to get those projects on board. But the government is saying that it sees benefits in not having ring fence or not imposing ring fencing, because it allows the projects to come on faster. Kaieteur News' position is that while that is so, there are 2 disadvantages. One, the monies, if I have paid off for one project, Liza 1 already, it means that the profits would be higher for us to share. If I've completed paying off for it and there's now 200 barrels, that means I get 100, you get 100. But in the absence of ring fencing, you can say, hey, you know what, Alex, hold 50. Because I need this 150 to go to something else. I needed to get another project rolling. So many organizations like the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they have advised that the one of the pros of ring fencing is that it delays more revenues from coming to the country. Because if you had it in place, you'd be able to pay off for projects and way quickly, way more, or at a faster pace, and you'd be able to have more revenues to share between company and state.
Sorry, you said ring fencing. You mean it would give us our profits faster?
Yes, it would.
So we're basically right now without ring fencing we're doubling down, hoping that the production increases and we get a bigger share later on.
Yes.
Obviously, this could be affected if oil prices just
Right.
totally dip in the future,
Right.
and then we potentially lose out.
Right.
Yeah, very interesting. A quick question. People would ask, why does, or at least I want to know, why does Exxon have the ability to use our profits or to make that decision to invest in other projects? Is that part of the contract?
Yes. So, in the absence of ring fencing, since we don't have any provision in the contract, so just to back up a bit, some countries would normally put a provision that says you can only use the revenues made from this project to deal with the expenses related to that project alone. Guyana did not have the foresight to include such a provision in the production sharing agreement. So we're at a loss. We have left a loophole for them to have the power to take the revenues and use for other projects. So the contract allows them to do that. And another important thing I just want to raise, there's a provision in the contract, it's called a stabilization provision. And that simply says that the economics of the project, of the entire field, whatever Exxon deems that to be, if they have calculated, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, we've discovered this, and so we have calculated that we have to make, for example, 400 billion. Should Guyana put anything in place that affects the economics, we have to compensate the company.
So, okay. So if we put ring fencing in now, and they don't make 400 billion, then we have to compensate for that.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
But this is for the whole of Stabroek Block.
Yes. This
Okay.
for any project that goes there.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well. Wow. I don't even know where to go from there. I mean, it's like you read about it, and again, like just like you were saying, you kind of learn about this industry as you keep hearing about it, and
Yes.
I'm sure it took you a while to like really,
Absolutely.
So when I can sit down and talk with somebody like you, I'm like, oh my God, that's so much at stake,
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine just in the negotiation of that you'd even someone from Guyana representing Guyana would even could think of, not to discredit them, I'm just saying like that's just so beyond the scope of maybe our economics of what we've been exposed to. It must be crazy difficult.
Yeah, and you see the thing is, still the production sharing agreements, they have gone through this process of trial and error in different countries. Some countries have been able to realize over the years of using these types of documents to say, well, hey, you know what? Maybe this is a little too stringent. How about we put in some type of safeguard or some type of mechanism. So some countries, because of this stabilization clause, and back then, just to back up a bit, countries normally use that type of stringent stabilization clause to convince or persuade companies to come and explore for oil, especially if they've never found any, they've not even discovered a drop of oil. So that was like one of those sort of sweeteners for the package to lure companies to come in and say, well, hey, you know what? You're well protected. We're not going to change anything or do anything. If you find it, you're going to be able to explore and monetize, and we're not going to, go back on our word. So that stabilization provisions have been used for that purpose, to protect the interests of the companies and to give them some sort of guarantee or relief that the country's not going to just switch up on them as soon as they find this type of bounty. But what many nations have learned along the way is that you still need to leave room for negotiation. So some stabilization provisions have evolved to say every 5 years, we will return to the table to examine this agreement to see that it is working in the favor of both parties.
Yeah, that would make the most sense given
Yeah.
the. So, but we basically did it all in one go.
Yeah, we kept the stringent
Has anyone
version.
ever commented on why, like at least from the government that signed it at the time, why there weren't any provisions? Why they just, how come they never, or this would have had to be included pre even like uh, testing for oil, right?
Yes, so the previous administration gave the I would say explanation that when we had discovered, so that agreement, just to give some dates, Guyana discovered oil in 2015, and in 2016 is when the contract was renegotiated and signed. So when the discovery was made, I'm not sure if you can recall, but Venezuela issued a decree, or it refreshed its claim over not just Guyana's Essequibo, but the waters that are adjacent to the Essequibo, off the Essequibo coast, And it was a very spurious claim, and the government claimed at the time, to reinforce Guyana's position or our stance. They gave a lot of sweeteners or a lot of incentives to Exxon to keep them there, because to have such a large corporation that is, it's from the U.S. and it means it's a large revenue earner for the U.S. It was important for them to do something that keeps Exxon from walking away.
Yeah. You think if they held out and then the fields were basically untouched or unclaimed by any private company, then that would leave room for Venezuela to come in and claim them, and potentially, if they took over that area, they'd be able to do business with whoever is coming in. You think that was like a threat, or is that?
So at the time, the Granger-led administration was of the view that that was a clear and present danger. Maduro's refreshing of his claims, or renewing his claim to Guyana and even making it more egregious. They saw it as a really clear and present danger at the time, and they thought that they needed, well, that's what they said, not what I thought.
Yeah.
But they explained at the time that they gave much more than they should because of the threat at the time. And it's anyone's guess what Venezuela could or they
Yeah.
might not do in this situation.
Yeah.
But
I'm
I
just
guess,
speculating, given the conflict. Total conspiracy.
but given what we are seeing now with Venezuela, the fact that before the Argyle Agreement was signed between President Dr. Finale and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on December 14th, we saw Venezuela making a lot of dangerous threats, threatening or giving an ultimatum to Exxon Mobile to exit within 3 months, and even all the other companies in the Essequibo region to exit within 3 months. And the government has told them, everyone has, just completely ignored it because this is our sovereign territory. And but that's just to show that you have no idea what Venezuela was capable of at the time. And it's not an excuse for a lopsided contract, but still, it helps you to understand that it's better to take precautions where Venezuela is concerned.
Yeah, for sure. I think also, just from a national point of view, we really have to figure out a way forward that works for everybody.
Right.
I sense that there's this like thing where we play victim a lot to these circumstances, and in many regards we are. But I mean, it's like we can't stay in that mindset. Ultimately, Guyana has to decide, oh well, this is the way forward, and we need to pursue this. I don't think all the oil wealth in the world will, give us good management of resources. But I'm hopeful. I mean, I was telling someone, and like you said, it's to be 18 now in the time of oil and gas. Even as a 31-year-old, I was telling my wife the other day that like I've never felt so hopeful. Like even at my age, like I can look and I just feel like I could do anything really and still make it.
Yeah.
Like if I want to get into this or get into that, like there's a path for me to get somewhere. When I moved back to Guyana in 2016, I didn't really feel that. I kind of felt like, let me just sort of look around. Even as a kid, it's like, well, the objective is to go away. My dad used to tell me, you need to get out of here. Go, and I want you to do something away. I want you to really find something worth doing and just, So to his dismay, I returned. But no, I think it's the right decision. And I think like it's just, there's so much opportunity and I'm hopeful. I think we need to know the facts. So which is why, your job and your role is so important. And I'm so happy you came. Like, this was an amazing conversation.
Yes.
I think like the way you broke it down, it's so like, just very candid and, it's not covered in emotion or these technical terms that confuse a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's easy to get riled up if somebody opposing a certain topic is talking and screaming, and then somebody defending it is talking and screaming, or there's these like technical terms that go straight over our heads and make us more confused. So I really thank you for doing this. I kind of just want to close by asking you two more questions. One is that you mentioned that there's like a shortage of resources and stuff like that across industries, given the heavy demand in oil and gas. But like people, youngsters getting into journalism right now, how, like, what is that? Like, is there like are there more people that are trying it out, or based on the fact that, the media landscape has changed, you don't really see as many young people coming into the journalism field? Not necessarily talking about retaining them, but like just starting out,
So when I started in 2013, I actually saw way more young people joining the media industry as opposed to now. I don't see a lot now. It's actually very difficult. Many times we put out vacancies, ads for reporters, and we don't get that response that we used to get before. And other media houses, colleagues that I've interacted with, they've explained too that, it's not easy to see like this, everyone's just, yeah, a lot of young people lining up to get into the industry. That could be for a number of reasons. But the one thing that I would, and I know that you didn't ask this, but I really just wanted to share this.
Please.
The field of journalism, to anyone, to any young person who is considering journalism, you have a love for writing. It's one of the most beautiful art forms that you can get into. It helps you to not just chronicle history or be a part of writing history, but it educates you. It gives you this holistic education of the world, of what your country is. I've been able to learn so much as a woman, as a citizen, in so many different realms because of being part of journalism. And I feel very fortunate to be part of it. And I would encourage any young person who has a love for writing and who's considering journalism to jump in. You know, and of course, be sure to try Kaieteur News.
Shameless plug, of course.
Yeah.
Definitely, Kaieteur News isn't going anywhere, and yeah, that's yeah. I totally agree. It's a dying passion among the young people today who are
Yeah.
consumed by clickbait and sensationalized,
Yeah.
very short form pieces of information. On a final note, uh, you know, you've been covering this topic for quite a while. What can we see? Where do you see Guyana going? And this is your objective opinion. Where do you see Guyana going in the next 10 years? Like, are you hopeful? What does that future look like to you?
So I learned from a really good economist that you never try to extend your opinions beyond 5 years.
Okay.
So I'll stick to that. I think this country is on the cusp of a transformation that is unlike any other we will see. And especially at this time, because the curve we are going up, it's fast and it's steep. And in 5 years, I think the skyline of this country, if we maintain this trajectory, the skyline of this country is going to be almost unrecognizable. I think the complexion of this country is going to change. The language is going to change. If you notice, we have Spanish being introduced in school. Just recently, the government announced that it wants public servants to start learning Spanish. I think some time ago, the president even said that he wants some of his ministers to start learning Spanish. And I think the behavioral change that we're going to see is really going to take this country forward if we continue to maintain our commitment to transparency, accountability, and improving the lives of the ordinary man. And that is what I hope we stick to. I really hope that we make the best of this golden ticket, because once we've spent it, there's no getting it back.
Well, Kiana, again, I can't tell you what a privilege this was. This is by far one of my this is one of my favorite Gyaff so far. Like,
Thank you.
This was such a wealth of knowledge to me, and to hear your perspective. And I just want to offer the invitation that, anytime you would like to come back and use this platform, I totally welcome it. I think this is something young people need to constantly keep hearing about, in very simple, objective terms, or, and yeah, this has been great. And thank you so much for coming. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. This was really informative, and I enjoyed having this Gyaff too.
All
So
right.
thank you.